And we are back. Welcome everyone to Reedsy Live, Reedsy's ongoing series of webinars where we bring professionals from the world of publishing to show you how to write and publish better books. Today we have a bit of a treat. We've had best-selling authors today, before presenting here on Reedsy Live, but today we have an international bestseller in the form of S.J. Watson, the author of Before I Go to Sleep, and two more books that, I wrote down somewhere, but I've can't bring it up just now. He'll surely tell us. But today he's going to be talking to us about what it means to have a good idea, how to sort of figure out what ideas you might have that could become a short story or novel. If you've never sort of done these before, it's just going to be a bit of a presentation. Our guest is going to come along and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. I can read all your comments that you leave on YouTube Live, so if you have any questions, do feel free to put them in there. I'll try to collect some of the a more diverse set of questions and ask them at the end, but there'll be an opportunity to ask your questions there. It's good to see so many people here already. We've got Mark from Florida, Bob from California, John from Florida, Victoriano from California. It's a real Golden State, Sunshine State battle here. Anyone from in between. We've got, Alana from Alberta, Canada, Isabella from New Jersey, fantastic. Eileen from New Jersey. It seems we're really hitting the coast here today, but if you're not from either of the coasts of the United States or from Canada, do let me know. It's always good to see folks from all over the place turning up to these. Anyway, my name's Martin. I'm from the team at Reedsy. We're an online community marketplace platform that connects authors, writers, with some of the world's best editors, designers, book marketers. Basically, all the folks who work in publishing who can help you get your book out there, make it the best it can be. You can find them right here on Reedsy. Just a bit of a plug before we start. We have Mark from Greentown, Illinois. Frank from Cambridge, Ontario. Ali's joining us from the Philippines. Mabuhay. We have Akeem from Jamaica. And Jan from Virginia. Wonderful. Emma from New Zealand. Thank you for tuning in. I know it's very early right now, but we appreciate you being with us. Adrian from the UK. Well, it's going to be a fantastic one. I'm going to bring Steve on in just a few minutes and introduce him, and we'll head off and get this thing started. But if you haven't already, give this video a like and subscribe to our channel. We put out new content every week. We have webinars every other week. And if you want to be the first to find out about these things, why not subscribe and hit the bell icon for alerts. With Katya from South Africa. I Hate Google a Lot is from Upminster in Essex near London. That is at the end of the district line, if I'm not mistaken. I'm here in North London myself, near the Emirates Stadium for anyone who's a soccer/football fan. Sherry's from Sydney, Nova Scotia. Fantastic. Well, if you haven't actually seen Reedsy Live before, you can go back and watch, I think about got almost like 6 years worth of old webinars that you can catch up on to find out all sorts of stuff, writing topics, things to do with editing, publishing, really great stuff. Head to blog.reedsy.com/live, links in the description, and you can catch up on quite a lot of my adult life devoted to bringing you what I hope is useful content. Fantastic. Fraser from Melbourne, nice and early. Wow. So many Antipodeans, or at least from sort of Oceania, Australasia. Really appreciate you folks joining. David E. from the Isle of Bute, which I believe is in the Inner Hebrides. Leo asks, am I an Arsenal fan? By virtue of proximity, I guess I am, but my family's from up in Sunderland, so I suppose they're my folks. Kate is repping NYC. Del from Montreal and representing Montreal Crime Racers. Fantastic. Well, it's good to see so many folks joining us live. I've just noticed it's... by the way, I'm just going to get a bit of housekeeping out of the way. This video is being recorded, so if anyone sees anyone in the comments saying that they're late, will there be a replay? The answer is yes. They can use this very link and watch this video again and again, whenever they like, until the heat death of the universe. They can also go to blog.reedsy.com/live. Links in the description. In the next few days, we're going to add a transcript. So if you prefer to read these sort of things, you're in luck. Okay, fantastic. Oh, well, I notice it's 8 o'clock where I am, which means it's 3 p.m. on the East Coast. Noon on Pacific. I think it's like 3 a.m. Hong Kong, 5 a.m. In New Zealand, Australia. So let's get this thing started. Please help me welcome my guest, S.J. Watson. Hello.
Hi, Martin. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not bad. You, I
Yeah.
believe, are here in the UK along with me. Whereabouts are you
Yes.
based?
I'm down in Brighton at the moment, where it's been a very wintry day. Actually, I think winter is upon us.
Well, we've had a bit of a sunny streak, I think, for a few days, and now we're due the bleak autumn that defines British life.
Yeah, here we go.
But yeah, well, really glad to have you join us. We're just going to wait a minute or two just for people to sort of come and join us, unless it's part of your sort of talk. Or would you like to sort of tell us a bit about yourself and sort of how you came to be with us here today? I guess the longer sort of stretch of it.
Do you mean how I came to be you, as a writer, or
Yeah, how do you come to be a writer and
how did I come to
all
be?
that
Like,
jazz?
well, like probably everybody who asked this question, I feel like I've always been a writer. But I used to work in the health service here in the UK, and so writing was kind of my hobby. And the short version is, as I kind of got older and um, had well, I kind of joked that my midlife crisis consisted of not I didn't have an affair or buy a Ferrari, not that I could have afforded one, but I enrolled on a writing course and decided to go part time at work and concentrate on my writing. So yeah, and then I did a course at and met an agent and wrote the book that became Before I Go to Sleep, although it had a dreadful title. It wasn't called that at first.
Oh, really? Was that the name the publishers urged you to give it?
No, it wasn't the point. It was my agent actually. She said, what she said, the first thing is the title's got to change, and I was like, okay. I mean, it was a bad title, but and then she said, all right, just basically go away and think of one. So I just spent like a few weeks. I think it was. This is while I was editing it. Still, I spent a few weeks. Every time I had an idea for a title, I kind of wrote it down and then presented her with a list of 5 or 6 at a time, and she'd be like, no. And eventually, she was like, I quite like Before I Go to Sleep. So it became that. And
Eh?
now it's weird because I can't think of it being called anything else.
And it's a good enough name that Hollywood didn't change it.
Yes, exactly.
But yeah, I remember actually watching that film. I think what must be 8 years ago or something,
Mm.
with Nicole Kidman and Colin Firth, and it must be quite exciting to sort of well, first I guess having your book option, and then actual real movie stars are in this thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because you hear so many stories about films or books rather that get optioned and then never actually quite make it as far as the screen. That I didn't allow myself to get excited. I told myself when Nicole Kidman was stood on the set with film in the camera, then I might get excited. But it was an incredible experience. It was lovely. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Well, it's about 4 minutes past. I think we have enough people to get started. I'll be sort of lurking in the background if you need anything, Steve.
Oh,
Otherwise, I'll see you at the end when, yeah, we're going to have a bit of a Q&A. So stick around, everyone, if you want to pick Steve's brains. Yeah, catch you in a bit.
thank you very much. Right. Hi, everyone. And such an international audience as well. I think this is the first time I've spoken to people from all over the world in this way. So that's quite interesting. But I realised that I think I've stumbled into a bit of a trap for myself, or well, I set the trap for myself, I suppose, because whenever I do events, one of the questions that I sort of dread being asked is, where do you get your ideas from? And I kind of realized today I've decided to spend half an hour or whatever, an hour talking about that very topic. But joking aside, what I hope to do really with this talk is to give you an idea of how to go about getting ideas. And more importantly, in many ways, how to keep the ideas that you have and what to do with them. And by that, I mean, well, perhaps I should talk about the structure of the talk. I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about what an idea is and how to spot them. And then I'm going to go on to talking about how we retain ideas, what we should do with them. And then the third part of the talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to choose the right idea to work with, because obviously in an ideal world, we'll end up with notebooks full of many different ideas, but which is the one that you're going to spend months or even years trying to turn into a novel or even a long short story. So really how to choose which ideas have got legs, which ideas have got the potential to become something exciting. And finally, the last part of the talk, I'm going to talk about how we stay true to the original idea if you feel that the work is drifting, that your story is drifting, or that you're getting away from what your original intention was. And at the very beginning, I'm just going to say there's more information about all of this on my Substack newsletter, and in particular the Writers Lodge, which is a community I've set up with bi-month or twice a month. I send out newsletters on various different writing topics and encourage subscribers to kind of join in and comment and share their work and everything. And there are some hopefully quite interesting and quite useful things on there. So do take a look at my Substack, which I think the link will be in the comments below. But having said that, I'd like to start off by I find it weird talking about ideas in a very specific sense because there can be a problem about sharing ideas too soon. I find an idea is almost like a hose pipe. And every time I share it with somebody or talk about an idea that I've had, it's like puncturing the hose pipe and a little bit leaks out. And if you're not careful, an idea can die. Or can feel wrong or feel silly if you overshare it too soon. So that's just a word of warning, I suppose. Unless an idea is something you're really happy with, really comfortable with, really content and sure about, it can actually, I would counsel against oversharing, because it only takes one person to look at you in a slightly strange way to suddenly you have doubt in the idea or lose confidence in it. But anyway, let's go on to the meat of the talk. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was spotting ideas, recognizing ideas when we see them. And I think it can be helpful to go back to basics, actually, to think about what actually is an idea. And when I was putting this together, I did a dictionary search on that very issue, what's the dictionary definition of an idea? And I found 5 or 6. And there were 2 in particular, though, that sort of struck me as being particularly helpful for the purposes of what we're talking about today. And the first was, an idea can be defined as something, I'm going to read it out, something such as a thought or conception that is the product of mental activity. So that was the first thing that I thought was quite interesting. And the second definition was a sense that something can happen, a notion or expectation. But if we look at that, if we really think about what an idea is, then I think we can see that ideas are everywhere. And what we have to do as creative people, as writers, as artists, is to stay open to them, to spot them. The subject of where does an idea come from? An idea comes from everywhere. It comes from all around us, but it's recognizing one. And that's really what we want to talk about today, is how do you recognize an idea that has some potential? Because I think it can be easy to go through your creative life thinking that all you have to do is stay open. All you have to do is keep your antenna up and an idea will present itself magically to you. And that does happen. It can happen. But I think that can be rare. And actually what we need to do is to put the work in. We have to turn up. We have to generate ideas. We have to force ourselves to build an idea from nothing. So the first thing I think I would say as a piece of advice really is to just turn up at the desk or wherever you want to do your work and just generate ideas, to put some work in and see what happens. And that's, I think, something to do even when you perhaps don't feel like it. I always think about this notion of writer's block as being an interesting one. When I was working in the health service, I wasn't allowed to have audiologist's block. If I had a patient in the waiting room that needed to be seen, I just had to go and do it. And if you work as a plumber or an electrician or whatever, you don't have plumber's block or electrician's block. You just have to get on and do the work. And I think there is an element of that, especially in the idea generation phase of what we do as writers, where you have to just get on and do it, whether you feel like it or not. But let's look in a bit more detail at the first aspect, or the first definition of an idea. So something that's the product of a mental activity. Yesterday or the other day when I was thinking about this talk, I was walking down the street and I looked up from my feet and saw a mobility scooter. And I decided I would put what I'm about to tell you to the test. I think you can generate an idea from almost anything. So the first thing I saw was a mobility scooter, and I just decided to muse on a mobility scooter and where it might take you in terms of it becoming an idea for a story. So first of all, I thought, well, what about if I wanted to write a romance that featured a mobility scooter? I could have two people who meet in a scooter shop, um, and that could go somewhere. Didn't go very far with that one, probably because, partly at least, because I'm not a romance writer. So I turned my attention to, well, what about if I wanted to write a crime novel or a crime story that featured a mobility scooter? The first thing I thought was, what about if we had a booby-trapped scooter? And then I thought, well, why would someone booby-trap a mobility scooter? And then I thought, well, would it be to kill people who are less mobile, older people, perhaps people who are disabled in some way? But why would someone do that? Well, what about if I was writing a political thriller? And then I decided, well, what about if I made the idea concrete? So I was writing a political thriller in which somebody wanted to kill older people or people who were less able. And I mean, this is silly in a way. And hopefully you can see that I'm not taking this very seriously. But you could see how that could lead to a story in which a body is discovered in mysterious circumstances, and ultimately it became apparent that that person knew of a minister's ambition to kill anyone over the age of 40. Now we're beginning to get somewhere in terms of generating something from that idea. But hopefully, I'm not about to write a story about a booby-trap mobility scooter. But what I am trying to hopefully show you is that you can take something that isn't particularly promising as an idea generation or as an idea in itself and generate something from it. And if you get in the habit of doing that regularly and doing that rigorously and keep on asking yourself, well, why? Why might that happen? What could that mean? Where would that take you? You can actually find yourself in some quite interesting territory. So if you're interested in an idea for an exercise that you could do as a result of this talk, the next time you're out of doors, or even right now and look through the window or whatever, depending on where you are, obviously, if you spot something unusual or something that strikes you as interesting, just do the same thing as me. Spend 2 or 3 minutes just musing on it. Where could it take you? It doesn't matter how silly your ideas are. No one's ever going to see them. You're not going to sit on a webcam at 8 o'clock on a Wednesday evening and tell everyone the ridiculous idea you've had about a mobility scooter, like I just did. But just play with them and see where they might take you. Another thing that I found really helpful, although this is slightly harder to do, is being half asleep. I've generated some of my best ideas when I've literally been half asleep. Often in the morning, if I press snooze on my alarm and then I'm kind of drifting in and out of sleep, if I'm musing on something, it doesn't happen very often. And unfortunately, I find it difficult to force this. It kind of either happens or it doesn't. But if you actually look at the way the brain works, when you're sleeping, when you're dreaming in particular, the brain is the reason we have such wild and wacky dreams quite often is because the brain amplifies the part of itself that is responsible for linking things, for making connections between seemingly disparate topics or disparate items or disparate feelings. And at the same time, it sort of shuts down or diminishes the activity from the area of the brain that senses. So what you can do when you're half asleep, when you're dreaming, what you're essentially doing is you're putting lots of random things together, finding connections and not censoring yourself. So it's great if you can do that, if you can actually muse on an idea whilst you're not quite focused on it, if in a way, if that kind of makes sense. And then write down what you come up with. That can be a really helpful thing to do. So really, I suppose I'm kind of fudging my answer of where do ideas come from, because I'm really saying they kind of come from everywhere. They can come from anything. The question is what you do with raw material if you see something which you think might turn into an idea and how far you take it. So just be more open, I would say, to musing, to being playful, to jotting things down. And that brings me really on to the second part of the talk. I want to talk a little bit about retaining ideas. I think this is a particularly good time to remind ourselves not to self-censor, um, not to only write down things that we think have potential to turn into novels or even short stories or whatever, but to write down almost anything that just strikes us as interesting in any way at all. Um, I used to, I mean, hopefully, as writers, we all carry some form of notebook around with us. I used to carry a physical notebook and a pen around everywhere I went. And now I have made the transition to digital. So I have a notes app on my phone in which I jot down things, make little observations, and then theoretically I don't do it as often as I should, but I try and categorize them so I can, tag them with various things. But actually, it almost doesn't really matter. Well, in fact, it doesn't really matter, I don't think, whether you have a digital notebook, a physical notebook, whether you have scraps of paper that you shove in a folder when you get home, or if you have, a highly indexed archive system for all of your notes. Because what I have found over the years is it's actually relatively rare I go through my notebook. It's relatively rare I go through the notes on my phone or the notes I have written down on bits of paper. It almost feels, in fact, it does feel like it's the activity of writing the note down. It's the activity of of making that um, physical effort, however it might be, to actually retain something, which seems to sort of imprint it into my brain almost. It cements it, or it kind of plants the idea in the soil. So often it's then when I'm writing and I need, I'm searching for an idea for, I don't know, a character trait or a fact or an observation or something. Then it's not for me. It's not about reaching for my notebook at that point. It's the act of noticing in the first place has kind of cemented it's in there. Um, so I think the most important thing, rather than having a highly indexed system, is just to get yourself in the habit of writing it down, to writing stuff down. It can be worth doing. I don't do it every day, but it can be worth doing. Trying aiming to do this every day if you have a moment of just sitting down in a coffee shop or wherever you might be, on a bus, public transport, or wherever, and just jotting down things that you notice, anything that catches your eye, anything that you find interesting, a verbal tick that someone has on the table next to you, or a habit that you observe, or clothing that people wear, or just anything that sort of strikes you, how you're feeling, what you've been doing, what you've been thinking about. You'd be surprised at how this retaining, this storing, this processing of information can kind of shift it to a part of the brain where you will work on it subconsciously, or you will kind of nurture it. It's almost like shoving stuff onto the compost heap, and it'll kind of actually, this isn't a very good metaphor, is it? But you know what I mean. It kind of will rot down into something better, into something more nutritious, and you'll also be training your brain to be more observant. So we can't produce work unless we take material in. So I think it's important to just get out there and observe the world, and you'll find an awful lot of ideas will come to you once you get in the habit of doing that. The third part of the talk that I wanted to concentrate on was when we have all of our ideas, hopefully we've got notebooks full, because it's worth saying, hopefully it's obvious, but it's worth saying that you're far better off having notebooks after notebook after notebook full of stuff that you'll never look at again. And it's far better that than missing the one killer idea that you have. I can't tell you how many times I've had an idea and thought, that is such a good idea. There's no way I'm going to forget that. And then, of course, half an hour later, I'm engrossed in something else, and my brain returns to it, and I just think, what was that idea? What was that idea? And there have been a number that, of course, have never come back to me. So you're far better off writing down too much than too little, which is hopefully fairly obvious. But once we have all of our ideas, the third thing I wanted to consider was, how do we know when an idea is good enough to sustain a long piece of fiction, whether it's something that's worth working on? And for that, I think it's worth returning to the second of those definitions of an idea that I found helpful, and that was an idea as a sense that something can happen, a notion or an expectation. And then particularly if we concentrate on a sense that something can happen, I think sometimes an idea comes to us as a bolt from the blue, almost fully formed. And that was certainly the case when I had the idea for Before I Go to Sleep. That came from an obituary that I read. I read an obituary of a man who suffered from, he'd just died, it was his obituary, but he'd suffered for all of his adult life really with very severe amnesia. And I read this obituary, and it was a result of an operation he'd had in his 20s. And I read this obituary, and I just thought he must have, even towards the end of his life, he died in his 80s, he must have still thought of himself as a young man because he'd been unable to form any new memories. And pretty much literally in a flash, I just had this vision of a woman thinking that she was young, thinking that she'd had a one-night stand, looking in a mirror and not recognizing herself, seeing someone much older. So that was a story idea that came to me pretty much fully formed. I still had to work on it. I mean, that's not something which in itself could sustain a whole novel, obviously. But I instantly felt it had potential. And I think that's what we're really looking for here. An idea that seems to open things up, that seems to invite more, that seems to open doors, I suppose, to invite different directions that we can go in. And I think you can sense when you interrogate your ideas, when you spend a bit of time thinking about them, thoughts that you've had, things that you want to explore, you can tell which ones seem to open up a world or open up story ideas or invite characters or invite conflict. I mean, conflict is really of some form. It doesn't have to be a high octane thriller or a crime novel, but conflict is at the heart of every story on some level. And so I think you can usually get a sense for which ideas invite conflict, or you can see a potential for there to be conflict and for there to be an antagonist as well as a protagonist. But not all ideas come as fully formed or as ready to go, I suppose, as that did for Before I Go to Sleep. My second book, Second Life, the idea for that was much more gradual. It came from two places, really. And the first was this is kind of in the very early days of blogging. I used to read a blog by a woman who was essentially, it was an online diary, really. And she lived in London, and she would talk about various mostly cultural things that she'd done, or restaurants she'd visited and operas she'd seen. And she had a very interesting and beautiful way of writing, which is why I read it. But after a while, I realized how much of herself she was giving away, and how somebody who perhaps had less than good intentions could quite easily pretend to be her ideal love match or partner or even just friend by pretending to have the same interests as her. So that was one of the ideas that fed into Second Life. I suppose it was an idea that I felt had potential, but it still wasn't fully formed. It didn't feel like it was a fully formed story ready to go. But then later on, sometime later, a friend of mine said to me, we were talking about alcoholism and various forms of addiction. And a friend said to me, addiction, she said, you know, Steve, addiction is a very patient disease. And I also wrote that in my notebook. And for some reason, which at the time I wasn't really sure about why, but those two ideas seemed to go together. And I think that's something to really be aware of, because some ideas are magnetic. They kind of attract other ideas to them. So you'll find ideas being drawn to each other. And sometimes it won't be obvious why. They won't obviously go together, but they'll somehow be speaking to each other. And I think those are the things to really be aware of. And when an idea kind of gathers momentum and begins to hook other ideas to it, then you can start to see an idea that has that sense of opening doors up and opening avenues up rather than closing them down. And they're the ones to really to work on and to muse over and to sort of spend a bit more time with. So really, I think one of the ways that you can tell whether an idea is good enough is that, but also ask yourself whether this is an idea that you can walk away from. Because sometimes, if you're lucky, you'll have an idea and it'll feel like you have to do this. I'm in the middle of this at the moment. I have a book that I'm desperate to write and a book that I'm writing, and they both feel like such good ideas that I'm desperate for one to be over so I can work on the next. And I'm taking that as a good sign for both of them, because I haven't given the one up I'm working on, and yet I'm still desperate to get to the one I want to get to. So there's sometimes an idea will have just that sense that it excites you. Sometimes, if you're very lucky, you can think to yourself, well, why is no one else doing this? Feels like such an obvious idea. Surely I can't be the first person to have thought of it. But it can be worth also asking yourself, firstly, does this idea excite you? But secondly, can you see a protagonist in it? Is there a main character? Is there that character who has a goal? And can that character can there be more than one or more obstacles between that character and their goal? You also have to, I think, consider whether the stakes are high enough and are there potential for multiple problems and setbacks along the way. Wanting to rescue a kitten from a tree isn't necessarily going to make a novel or even a short story, whereas being stranded on Jupiter might. So how big is the idea? How many stones can you throw at your character, for want of a better way of putting it? It's also worth, I think, thinking about, can the problem be made to feel relatable? For example, you might have a character stranded on Jupiter, but can you give them a compelling reason to get home that other people, readers, can identify with and understand? Maybe they're missing the birth of a longed-for child, or learning a loved one is terminally ill, or something like that. So can you make it relatable, no matter how far-fetched it might be? So they're all questions that are worth asking yourself. And I'd also say, don't second guess yourself. There's an excellent YouTube video called "Everything Is a Remix," which I'm hopeful Martin might let me put in the link as well. It's definitely worth watching at. Looking at and having a look at and watching, because I think that you can fall into the trap of always looking for an original idea, and no idea is really original. Everything has been done before, really. What you can do, though, is you can take disparate ideas, you can take other people's ideas, you can transform them, you can combine them, and essentially you can remix them into your own thing. In many ways, Before I Go to Sleep is 50 First Dates, although I hadn't seen that film when I wrote the book, believe it or not. But in many ways, Before I Go to Sleep is 50 First Dates, cross of Sleeping with the Enemy, or as if it's been written by Alfred Hitchcock. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can take other people's work, you can take other people's stories, or stories that have been done before, and make them your own. The last part of the talk, before we go on to questions, I wanted to talk a little bit about what to do if you feel your story drifting. And by that I mean, I suppose, you had this idea of writing, let's take the guy stranded on Jupiter again, and then you find actually you've written 20,000 words and he's nowhere near Jupiter, is somewhere else. What do you do in that situation? I think the really important thing there is to ask yourself, is it actually drifting in a more exciting direction? And it can be worth also asking, does it make you uncomfortable? One of the quotes about creativity generally that I really love, I don't have it pinned above my desk, but I could easily, it's probably because it's implanted in my brain, is by David Bowie. David Bowie said, and I'm going to read it out, go a little bit out of your depth. And when you don't feel that your feet are quite touching the bottom, you're just about in the right place to do something exciting. What I take from that is it's not supposed to feel comfortable. If it feels comfortable, we're probably not in deep enough. We're probably not in an exciting place. We're treading water. So if you found your story drifting, but it's exciting you, scaring you where it is, you're excited about possibilities and also scared, it might actually be worth continuing down that path. However, it can also be worth spending a bit of time just returning to the spine of your story. What was the original idea? What was the original thing that you saw, that you heard, that you felt? What was the tingle that made you think this could turn into a novel? And how can you encapsulate that? How can you and should you return to that spine? It can really help to boil the spine of the idea down to a line or two really early on. So, for example, for me, I suppose the spine of Before I Go to Sleep was it's about a woman trying to work out who she is. Now, the story did drift. That story did drift, but it never drifted too far away from that spine. It's about a woman trying to work out who she is. And I think as long as you are staying true to the spine of the story, then you can see any drifting as being an exciting thing. It can be something which is inspiring. It might be the work kind of telling you where it needs to go and what it wants to be. So I think spend a bit of time once you've settled on a night, you've found your idea, you've decided which one feels exciting to you, which one feels like it's got potential, which idea feels magnetic, and is really kind of driving you to the laptop or the pen and paper or whatever. Once you've got that, try and boil it down to ideally a line, just a sentence of what the idea is, and just think of that as a spine of your story and keep on returning to that and keep on checking that you're staying true to that. I think it's when that shifts too far, you've really moved away from your idea, and you need to look at whether maybe you've moved to a better place. Maybe you need to scrap the original idea. But as long as you're staying true to the spine of it, I think you're on the right track. So that's kind of really what I wanted to say about ideas. To summarize, really, I think just basically remember ideas are everywhere. Retain as many as you can, and even less than promising ones, the ones that seem less than promising, and just daydream, spend a bit of time toying with them. No one's going to see the results of these daydreams, so just go as wild and as wacky as you can, and see where it takes you. See if any of the ideas seem to be magnetic, see if any of them seem to kind of attract each other or give you other ideas or other directions. If any in particular excite you, then go with that. Spend a bit of time going even further with that, perhaps taking it in an even weirder, more wonderful place. If you can't believe you're the first person to have thought of this idea, then you really know you're onto something. Especially if it has a sense of opening things up. If you can honestly say an idea seems to be enlarging the world of the story, then I think it's definitely worth looking at. Whereas if it feels like it's closing things down, obviously, be very cautious about proceeding with it. And I would say really early on, try and identify the backbone of your idea. What's the spine of your idea? And stay true to that, even if you feel that the meat of it is drifting. As long as you've got the spine of it in place, I think you're on the right track. So I wanted to see if anyone's got any questions now, and just quickly remind you if there's more information about this. In fact, there is a newsletter about ideas. There are some of these ideas in it, some of these thoughts and tips on my Substack, which is sjwatson.substack.com, and I think the links are going to be down below.
Yep, if you just expand the description of this video, you'll be able to see that there. But cool, thank you so much, Steve. There's a bit of a delay, so folks, if you have any questions, do put them in there. And of course, do sign up for Steve's Substack. And I notice there's a good chunk of you, most of you, have not given this video a like. So if you enjoyed what you heard, please give us a like. It really helps us a lot. One of the interesting things, like you mentioned, like a lot of people kept bringing up the fact that their ideas sort of came like in the toilet or in the shower. And I think like these days, with that sort of idea of getting ideas, before, while you're sort of drifting off to sleep, I think a lot of people these days like listen to podcasts or radios or TV while they're falling asleep, and we're not giving ourselves that sort of time to be bored where you have the opportunity for these ideas to hit.
Yeah.
Do you sort of consciously adjust your personal sort of like daily routines just to sort of give you that sort of clear headspace?
Not as much as I should. I think it's absolutely right, though. And it's an interesting point that, I mean, I remember when I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I was bored a lot of the time. I wasn't constantly glued. I didn't feel like I had to fill every moment with staring at my phone or playing a game or going on Twitter or going on Instagram, or editing this TikTok or whatever it might be, And so I spend a lot of the time just sitting around daydreaming. And I think it's true that putting your phone down a little bit and not drifting off playing a game on your phone or whatever, it can be really helpful. And it's a very interesting point about the loo and the shower as well. I mean, I find especially when I'm stuck, if I'm writing and I'm stuck on a plot point and I can't work out, well, why would X do Y, or why would this person ever go here, or why would this, and I'm trying to figure it out. I can sit at my desk staring at my computer for half an hour and get nowhere. And then when I give up and I go and wash up, or use the bathroom or whatever, that's when I'm like, oh, of course. Especially I find as well when when I swim, because I'm nowhere near my phone, I'm nowhere near a notepad, I can't possibly take notes. That's when I get 5 ideas in a row. I have to try and retain them as I'm doing the breaststroke. So
Like
yeah, I think there's something about when you switch the conscious part of your brain off a problem, that's when it can actually do the work.
yeah, like Murakami speaks about it in his book. What we talk about when we talk about running, because he like apparently wakes up every morning and runs like 10 miles or something.
Mm.
And yeah, there's something about sort of giving yourself that space to just sort of drift, and then the ideas do tend to come. We've
Yeah.
got a question here from Fraser Green that's sort of semi-related. Do you have any tips for starting a writing session? I always find this being the hardest part, getting back into the right mindset for writing. Once I'm in, I'm in. But he's wondering if you have a process.
Yeah, well, I think it's different for everybody. I know exactly what you mean, Fraser. I most times when I sit at my computer, I hate it. I'm like, I would rather do anything than carry on with chapter 94, whatever it is that I'm writing. But I think for me, it's just experience. It's just no. For me, it's very much like jumping into freezing cold water. I don't want to do it, but I know that once I'm in, it's going to be fine, and I'm actually going to enjoy it. Um, So, I mean, it's an old tip. I was at Hemingway. I can't remember who first said it. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. I'm not going to claim it's my tip, but it can be really helpful to always finish a writing session in the middle of something. So, ideally in the middle of a definitely in the middle of a scene, not never at the end of a scene, but ideally in the middle of a paragraph even, or even in the middle of a line, so that when you get to the desk the next day, you instantly know what you've got to do. You've got to finish that line, finish that paragraph. I think it can be difficult to start a scene at the same time as starting a writing session, but finishing a line or even finishing a word, mid-word, even possibly, feels a bit easier. I do do that. And the other thing that I find really helpful is I will often, especially if I'm really not feeling it, I'll often start a writing session by just doing some kind of light editing of the previous. I don't edit the whole of the previous day's session, but I might go back a couple of paragraphs and just look at them again. And by light editing, I mean I'm just moving words around. I'm just replacing the odd word, changing the punctuation or whatever, and it just feels like that sort of eases me back into it gently, so that when I then reach having to produce new stuff, it doesn't feel quite so much like jumping into freezing water. It's just jumping into cold water then.
We've got a question here from Emperor Penguin. Could you talk a bit more about what the spine of a story is? How do you know what it is, and can you give an example?
Um, well, I think for me anyway, I mean, some people might call it the elevator pitch. I'm not really sure that's a particularly helpful definition, but I suppose it's really, you need to be able to, if someone says, what's your story about? I think you need to be able to say it's about this character who wants this thing, but then this happens, so they have to this. I think you need to know those concrete facts, but there's also the kind of more esoteric, or the more kind of thematic, perhaps is a better way of putting it, spine of the story. It's about a woman searching for who she is. It's about a couple fighting over the custody of their child. It's about, it could be anything, but I think it's really the spine of the story is the thing that first attracted you to the idea, the thing that you first wanted to do. So, The Handmaid's Tale, um, it's basically a feminist 1984. It's a dystopian kind of like 1984 style, but through a very feminist slant. Everything else is kind of hung on onto that, but that's the spine of it. So it's kind of a very simple, very short way of saying it's about this. That doesn't involve character names or particular plot points or even setting. It's about this.
We have a question here from Mike. Once you have an idea, how do you explore it? Do you write, research, or ponder the idea? Yeah, I wonder. Research can
Yeah.
sometimes be quite dangerous.
Yeah, well, research can be dangerous. I mean, I think I don't tend to research until I'm pretty sure, well, until I do know that this is the idea I want to work with. Um, and then, but then I'll kind of I'm someone with my research. I'm someone who will jot down as I'll write, and then I'll realize what I need to know. So I don't do all the research before I start, but that's because of the kind of books I write. I don't write historical fiction. I don't write stuff that requires a lot of research up front. Um, what I do is I ponder for quite a while. So I just kind of play with the idea until I'm sure it's the right one. Um, and usually I know that it's the right when I have one of the clues as well as the things I was already talking about was when I have characters and they feel real and I can feel that they are um, I can put them in a situation now how they would react. So if this is a question as well about whether I plan or kind of just dive in and see where it takes me, I've become more of a planner. I don't think there's a right and a wrong way to do it. I have to say that at the very beginning. I was at a crime writing festival 2 weeks ago, and for every author on that, because I'm obsessed with this, for every author on that stage who said they have a 90-page outline before they even begin to write the book. There was somebody who said, I have no notes. I have a character and a situation. And I just see where it goes. So there isn't a right way and a wrong way. But for me, with each book, I'm writing my fourth book now, and with each one, I've become more of a planner. So once I've kind of got a strong idea of the characters in the world of the book and what the basic story is, if you like, I then will sit and plan out, okay, how am I going to tell the story? I never stick to it. It's always a kind of movable feast. But I try and stick to the story, so I'm a bit of a planner.
So yeah, we've had a few more questions around the sort of planning and all that. Alana says, "Do you have a preferred method or structure you like to work with to develop your story ideas?"
Um, well, I think it's important to. I think there are several things you need to know before, or I need to know before I can start writing. I need to know obviously my main character, but also what the main antagonist is going to be, who the main antagonist is going to be, and then the inciting incident. So I need to. I don't know if this is what Alana means, but I need to know what's going to trigger this story. How are these? What's going to set the wheels in motion? I suppose. What's going to interrupt the status quo at the beginning of the book. Which also then implies, of course, that I need to know what that status quo is. So I need to know the beginning of the book and what's going to trigger it before I can even really start to develop the story ideas. Before I go to sleep, I'm trying to think back. Before I go to sleep, that was a slightly different one because I didn't really plan that book out. Weirdly, it seems like I should have done because it's so intricate. But in many ways, I wish I had. But with that book, I had my main character. I knew she had a memory condition. I knew that she was going to believe that she had a one-night stand, but she was actually in her own home with her husband. But that's not a story. It only became something I felt I could start to write when I also knew that there was going to be another person involved who was telling her not to trust the man she believed was her husband, and that's what kickstarted the book, really. So in terms of like a preferred method or structure, I think I have a spreadsheet that I've made myself where I've asked myself a series of questions. Main character, antagonist, problem, inciting incident, midpoint, kind of. But that kind of changes. But I need to have a rough plan and ending. I sort of know how the story is going to end,
So
and
when
then
you
I
say
start writing.
these days you plan a bit more, is
Mm.
that sort of the extent of it? You don't write like a one-page
Well, no,
thing as opposed to
now I
like
mean, with this book now, I have to. I have to kind of know all of those. Those are the kind of basics. That's the kind of minimum. But now I now before I write a scene, I've So let me think. With the book I'm writing at the moment, I planned it all, I thought, and then wrote the first third of it, and then realised the plan wasn't going to work. Then replanned the second two thirds. Um, so it's a mix of planning and pantsing. But yeah, but now I plan every scene. So for the rest of it, I'm 2/3 of the way through it now, and I now have a plan to the end, which is this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. But I write very plot-driven books.
Hmm.
I don't think everybody has to do that, but
And
um,
when you sort of plan out that scene, is it pretty much just like a literal sentence of this happens in the scene, and
yeah,
then
yeah,
just enough
and then
so that you
I leave
can?
the kind of rest to kind of But then I know people who literally will write a 90-page outline saying exactly what happens in every single scene, what the character notices, what the room smells of, what they're wearing, which that feels. I mean, 90 pages feels almost as like a first draft to me.
Yeah.
But so it's nothing like that detailed. It's like, this happens, then this happens, then this happens.
Oh, someone has asked. Oh, this is from much earlier. Susan asked, "What was the original title?"
I once vowed I would never tell anybody this, but I have actually told people before. So it was originally called the Seahorse Diaries, which made sense to me because the part of the brain that is responsible for storing memory is called the hippocampus, or
Mm,
one of the parts anyway, and it's shaped like a seahorse. And she keeps a diary in the book.
yeah.
It's a dreadful title. I mean, yeah, for the type of book it is, it's not a good title.
Yeah, I think
But
at the time, anything with the something diaries suggests a very different genre, perhaps.
yeah, yeah.
Lucille asked, "Do you have a particular time of day that works best for your writing ideas?" I guess.
Yeah, I think especially for something, I get less creative as the day goes on, and then I have another burst of creativity like around now, sort of maybe 9, 10 o'clock. Um, so I'm not a morning, and I think it's because I'm not really a morning person. But I force myself to get up, and I kind of get to my desk as soon as I can. When I think I'm not half asleep, but I am sort of not quite awake, if that makes sense. I'm sort of I think the self censoring part of my brain hasn't quite kicked in yet. So for me, it's only I'm much more creative in terms of generating ideas or interesting things um, early in the day, and then late at night. Probably as I'm getting tired again, to be honest.
Mm.
Um, so I save the afternoons for sort of admin and social media stuff and things that aren't that creative. Um, yeah.
I've got one here from Callie Marcelisi. She says, "You mentioned that you connected with an agent at an event. Is this something previous, perhaps? And eventually that helped you get published. How much material did you have ready? Did you pitch the agent then? I guess the better way to go through this is like, do you
Hmm.
have the short version of how you first sold your book?"
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I have, but I'm not sure how helpful it really is to everyone because it was quite an unusual story. I was on a course, and Claire, who is now my agent, came along. They invited on the final night of the course. They invited a few people along to talk to us about what agents do, who they are, what they're looking for, how to work with them, etc., etc., etc. And we had a part because it was the final night of our course. We did a 6-month course, so we had drinks afterwards. Claire hung around, and I chatted to her, and she said, "What's your book about?" And I prepared my elevator pitch because we'd done that the previous week, and so I blurbed my elevator pitch at her, and she said, "That sounds interesting. When it's done, send it to me." But hopefully, so that's quite an unusual, unique, but what I would say for a more general thing is I think to bear it, if an agent is the way you want to go, if you're looking for an agent, I would advise people um, it's a time to put your shyness to one side. I'm less so now, but certainly back then, this is like 12, 13 years ago, I was an incredibly shy person. But I remember really clearly being in that room and seeing Claire, like top London literary agent, chatting to two friends of mine from the course, and feeling really embarrassed, scared to go and talk to her. But then I just thought to myself, if I if I don't just pluck up the courage now to go and speak to this person, what's the point of me spending all these hours, you know, creating this book, writing this book, if I'm not going to jump this final hurdle? So I made myself do it. So I think it really is a time to push yourself outside your comfort zone. And remember that agents are looking for us, you as writers, as they're not the gatekeepers that are trying to, you know, crush everyone's dreams that I think some people think they are. They are looking for writers. They are looking for new talent because it's how they make their living, and it's also what in every case I've met, every agent I've met, it's what excites them about what they do for a living. But there's just an awful lot of rubbish out there, so that's the problem. So I think, you know, you need to concentrate on writing as good a book as you can, but then once you've done that, just do your best to politely, I'm not saying mob agents, I'm being very cautious about what I'm saying now, but if you're ever in a situation, if you're ever at a literature festival or whatever and there's an agent there, politely introduce yourself, you know, try and get over that shyness. Put yourself out there.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's helpful. I hope so, but
yeah. If you're sort of in those situations, like every agent I've met and editor, like really lovely people, and I
mm,
guess the one thing you don't want to do is go up there and just like immediately sell yourself. Like sometimes it's just good to just start with
yeah,
a hello and introduce.
there are good times and bad times to do it. I mean, I've actually been on holiday with my agent, and we've been sat around a pool, and someone's come up and pitched a book to her, and she's like, I mean, she's very polite about it, but she's like, "Oh, I wish people would leave me alone." You know, there's a bad time to do it,
Yeah, yeah,
but if you're at a literary event and there's an agent there, they're kind of half expecting it.
yeah, yeah. Got just a few things. Victoriano, I think, was in the actual comments talking about perhaps getting an editor. Victoriano, if you're still here, if you go to blog.reedsy.com/live, we actually had a webinar, I think, half a year ago, where one of our editors actually talked about things you should be looking for when you're searching for an editor on a place such as Reedsy, perhaps. So, yeah, if anyone has got to the point where you're ready for like a set of professional eyes to help you take your manuscript to the next level, even if it isn't complete, check it out. We have a few different sort of services that our editors do offer in terms of developmental help that can be useful. Check it out. You can send them a request. There's no obligation, and they'll sort of tell you how much they'll charge for whatever sort of collaboration. And I think it may be time to sort of draw this to a close. Of course, remember in the comments below, sorry, in the description, there is a link to Steve's Substack and also to his author website if you want to check out any of his books. The transcript for this will be sent out in the next couple of days. And yeah, Steve, is there anything else you'd like to share with the crowd before we finish up?
Just to wish everyone good luck. Really, you know, it can be an incredibly hard thing to do to write a book, but incredibly rewarding as well. So keep it fun. If it's fun, you know you're on the right track. It's not fun every day, but if it's at least fun some of the time, you know you're on the right track.
Yeah, great, fantastic. See you soon. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another one. Have a good day.